Bobby Ballman.
Welcome. I'm Bobby Bouwman. It's amazing to be here. Amsterdam, it's always a nice pleasure to be here. You can find me on the internet at Bobby Bouwman sign. Let's go to Hospitable. I work at Hospitable. We're sponsoring this year. My colleagues are up there somewhere. Yeah, there you go, there you go. It's only a few of them, so we don't have that much of a big team, but it's very awesome to have all of them here. Our mission is to give hosts their time back, and we built a software to help hosts manage their vacation rentals. And as I said before, we're proudly sponsoring, so check out our booth. And we have some chocolate there, and we have a yo-yo competition as well. So if you're good with a yo-yo, try it out and show your skills. So I'm going to talk today about surviving large applications. And there's a bunch of issues you will encounter when building and maintaining large applications. And we should be mindful about how we approach these things. So today I will dive into some lessons I learned from this and in maintaining those large applications. Let me start with saying that there is no silver bullet in maintaining or surviving a large application. Every application is different, every company is different, the culture is different, and so are its challenges. And I worked on so many Laravel projects during my time working with Laravel. And Hospitable has been by far the biggest application I worked on, but it also has the most legacy code. And yes, it's not all glamour and it's not all green on our side. There's actually legacy code, and that's perfectly fine because we are trying to grow the company, and you need legacy to grow as well. So I'm going to talk about some statistics within Hospitable, so you believe me that we are working on a large application. And we have a Laravel application running with a MySQL database in a Kubernetes cluster. And it's currently maintained by 16 engineers, which includes the DevOps engineer and the front enders as well. So we have a total of 13 terabytes of data in our database. It's covered in 8 databases. Our biggest one from the core application is 9 terabytes. And the other ones are smaller and mostly connected to microservices. And we are starting to split these databases in smaller parts to make it more easier to maintain them and to migrate them if needed. But that are challenging enough already. So we're currently running around 1,750 pods on production, which is just the API, web traffic, and webhook stuff. So this doesn't include any queues or workers. And then we have around 3,400 to 4,100 workers for pods that are doing the queues. And we have around 148 different queues that are working all the time. And this is auto-scaling, so normally it's around 3,500 on a daily basis. But sometimes it spikes to 4,100. Our most users are in the US, so whenever the US wakes up, you can see everything spike in our system. And so that is 51 million jobs a day processed by our system, which is crazy if I'm saying the number. We don't really notice it while doing our work because we build anything to be scalable right away. And I also want to say that this is not a talk about large data sets or those kind of issues. It's more about the business rules, the complex domain that you get when working on this application, and they evolve over time as the development goes on. And you might have heard that some people said that Laravel is not the right tool for a big application. Well, as you can see, we are running pretty big numbers. It's perfectly fine to run Laravel. And I learned that the problem usually is between the keyboard and the chair. It's the developer that's building the application. So how can we do this? Well, we need some rules, and we have 3 things that are the most important things. Those are development rules, writing tests, and the people in your team. The people that in general determine how your application will end up. And in the end, you will end up with an application you want to work on, that you can easily understand, and you're not overwhelmed with all the information that's inside the system. And the rules will mostly apply for that. And if you don't have those rules, you're going to run away from those applications. It's getting too complicated for you. And so that might also be a thing. If it's too complicated for you, maybe that's not the correct application to work on. So how can we survive a large application? And I want to take a step back and talk about a pizzeria called Artisan Crust. And I made Kaneko design a logo for me. I made him do a lot of things for me. Crazy. I need to do this more often. So if you have modules, domains, however you want to call them inside your application, you can see them as recipes for your pizzeria. Think about your code as a recipe and how it's split up in your code base. Would a new developer be able to understand how to make a new pizza or how to make a new feature inside the code base? Would you still understand your code after 6 months? Would another person understand it after 6 months? Will you understand those recipes still? So let's say we have a list of ingredients. Would you know what you can make of this? Who knows what you can make of this? Pizza. Very good. It's very easy. A basic pizza you can make. You wouldn't expect, right, with all the pizzas? So as you can imagine, selling one type of pizza is not ideal for your business, right? You need to sell more features, just like in your application. And so this equals to more ingredients. So now we have a bunch of ingredients, and what now? Do you know which kind of pizzas we can make now? There's a ton of combinations we can make now. And it's actually great that you have multiple types of pizzas, but it also makes it more complicated. And there's so much more information now. And so new employees might get confused because they see all these ingredients and they don't know how to create a pizza from then on. And they might even think that they are the problem because the domain is just too complicated. But instead, we wanted to make it easier for them to work with. And for the current employees, it's very clear because they're used to it all the time. They're using it all the time the same way. They already knew when they started building it this way, so they are used to those routines. But if you apply those rules, it becomes easier for everyone. So there's this new employee coming in, and they say, boss, let's organize these ingredients to make it easier to work with. After all, a new employee that comes in has more knowledge, they might have knowledge, they have different experiences, and they have fresh ideas that you can apply on the code base. If you're working for 5 years on a code base, it's really hard to come up with new ideas sometimes. So a fresh face is definitely helping. So the owner of the pizzeria agrees and says, let's organize them by color. Well, that's not helping. Maybe even more confusing, right? Like we grouped everything that's yellow and green, but can I still make something out of this? And although it might sound easier if you group them by color, it's definitely not. It's actually harder now. And so you probably have seen this approach inside your Laravel application. We start with one models directory, one controllers directory, one middleware directory, one notification directory, and we keep putting all the new models in there and the new notification there. And we call this classes group by design pattern, which is perfectly fine for small or medium applications. However, once your application starts to grow at a certain size, the way of navigating your code or understanding your business rules becomes very hard. So, geez. One more sip. So, classes group by design pattern, it describes a trait about those classes, but it doesn't describe on what kind of domain they belong to. So the owner and the employees sit together and brainstorm on a better solution. They decide to group the ingredients per pizza instead. And of course there are some shared ingredients, but we leave them in the middle to make it easier. So now we can easily see what kind of pizzas we can make. So for example, we have this chicken pizza with vegetables. Well, that's very easy to make because we have the centralized ingredients together and we can get all the other ingredients we need for that specific pizza. Now it's very clear in which part of the kitchen you need to be to make that pizza. And they are easily accessible as well. So now's the question, what prevents us from making a mess of all the shared ingredients? Well, there isn't really a solution for this, except rules. We need to find boundaries to make sure that we don't mess it up. And so this all comes down to what you decide with the team. Do you set rules? Who can touch it? Who can touch it? In general, everybody should be able to touch it, but you have to decide on how things work. So you can do that with code reviews. You can do that by making a documentation on it. For example, the Spatie team has their whole documentation written down on the website on how their code looks like, their code style looks like. And those kind of things might help as well. So now we're going back to a little bit more of the code part. So if you have domain-driven development, layered architectures, microservices, you name it, all of these have a place in the world. But the biggest advice I can give you is going back to the basics. And we have heard that a few times today already, but staying with the defaults of the framework is insanely good. Like, for example, the naming conventions of Laravel, they're actually really good. And especially with Laravel, Laravel comes with the most default configuration you can find, and everybody understands it, like Luke told us as well. And I would say pick a stack and stick with it. It's really fun to dive into different frameworks and play around with them, but if you have a big application, it actually becomes a burden to maintain it. Because instead of upgrading one type of framework, you now have to upgrade 2 types of framework. And this also applies to front-end frameworks, databases, and hosting. And it doesn't say you can never change stacks. Sure you can, but if you at some point have this size of an application where you have 1,000 classes, like switching a framework takes years, and then you even have more legacy created. And next to that, you also need to train all your employees to learn that new framework or hire the correct ones for that framework. So that becomes harder. And so within Hospitable, we have the saying, the $1 million engineer. So this refers to a high-skilled engineer who makes a high impact on company's value. They made a high impact by making a certain technical decision and build a bunch of microservices or certain design patterns they applied. But they were really hard to modify or maintain by the rest of the team. And at some point, this engineer decides to leave. And then what? Now you have a complex system and nobody to maintain it. Well, for us, the estimation of that cost was $1 million. So that's a very expensive thing that we had. Who remembers this movie? Final Destination. This is the bus factor, right? This means there's one person within the team that's responsible for a certain thing. And if something happens to them, we have a problem. So that's what we call the bus factor. And you want to stay away from that as much as possible. And it's really hard, because if you have a small team and you have a big code base, everybody's working on things, but it's really hard to share that information with each other. So what can you do to reduce the bus factor? Well, at least stay with one stack, right? So if you stay within Laravel and you use the basic defaults, it already becomes a lot easier for another developer to just read the code, because they will understand it, what's going on. Just like Luke said, go to the web.php file. You already know what's going on. If you use those defaults, it's already really good. So if you hire a new person, and they are not using that framework, they are not experienced with that, that makes it harder. And it also helps with the team to grow. So if you know you're using Laravel for the next 5 years, you can already tell to the team, like, okay, we're going to stay on Laravel, use the tools that are connected to Laravel, use the techniques that are available within Laravel, and learn those things in your own time, in your company time. Invest time in that instead. That will make them a better employee in the end, and you will have a better code base. And you also don't always need to hire the best qualified person for the job, because sometimes the best qualified person of the job is better in Symfony than in Laravel. So you need to hire someone that is a cultural fit and a team fit, and they need to know the basics of the framework. But the coding, we can learn someone. That's very easy. But communication skills and culture is really hard to teach someone. So it's really important to make sure that you hire someone that fits within the team. And keeping your application up to date is a really hard thing. And it's already challenging enough, especially when you have a really big application. And tools like Laravel Shift will definitely help you with that. But it's still not doing everything. Like, you might have a third-party package included that's not updated to Laravel 11 yet, and you want to upgrade there. Well, you need to wait. Or you need to find a replacement for it. So that's a thing that we see as well. We start to replace these things with easier maintainable code that we have written instead of using a package. And there are certain packages that are really well that you can keep using. For example, the Spatie packages, you will know they will be updated and they will keep existing. That's totally fine. But there are some less popular packages that are harder to maintain. It's fine for your small projects, but for bigger projects, it's really hard to rely on those. And also, if you use a microservice structure, or if you have one big application like we have, like a big monolith and a few microservices, at some point there might not be any business value to upgrade those microservices. But you still need to invest in those. And they might run behind, and it's harder to keep them up to date. And especially if they are in a different framework, it becomes even harder, especially if there's no business value. So yeah, we try to run a big monolith structure with some microservices and try to keep all of them up to date. And you also see the other way around, right? Like where the microservices are easier to update because it's a small code base, there's less dependencies, and then the big monolith is hard to update because there's so many legacy code, so many old packages. So those are both challenging. Well, and staying up to date, it also makes it easier to hire new people. Like, who wants to work in a Laravel 5 environment or a PHP 5.6 environment? Nobody wants to work there. Everybody wants to work with the latest and greatest. So you need to make sure that all your tools are on the latest version to hire the best people as well. If I'm looking for a new job, I'm definitely not going to work with PHP 5.6 anymore. So I would be definitely using the new tools. And the same goes for packages that are released by the Laravel team or by a Spatie team, for example. So if you look at Pennant, for example, that is the feature flag package. If you need a feature flag, if you need those features inside your application, why not use the package instead? You know it's going to be maintained by the Laravel team. You know it's going to be stable. You know it's well tested. So that's a really good way to use a third-party package inside your application without having to care too much about the dependencies. Of course, you need to decide if it's the right tool for the right job, but we always need to do that anyway as a developer. So throwing more developers against a project doesn't get any better. It doesn't make it better or faster. It doesn't work. So there's this saying called 9 mothers won't give birth to a baby in 1 month. Even though it's 9 people, it doesn't go faster. And we experience this with software as well. You can put up a team of 30 people on one application, but they will just be in the way of each other. So ideally, you would have like a team between 4 and 8 developers maximum. That works best in my experience. Within Hospitable, we even have smaller teams, and that works really well. So I want to talk about the application structure as well. So software architectural patterns are essential for designing and maintaining and developing those large applications. But as I said before as well, I want to go back to the basics. And the basics are Laravel basics. But how do you do that with an application with 200 models and 1,000 controllers? That becomes very difficult. So in general, you would split up the code base in 2 parts. One part is all the available features in their own group. So you can see them as domains. This includes controllers, models, events, listeners, notifications, jobs, and so on. And I usually would put them in a product directory. And then the second part would be a third parties directory, because we are connecting to a lot of third parties, and they have their own code. So we need to connect to the API. We use the HTTP facade for that. And then we have all the responses. We use value objects to put those responses from JSON in value objects to easily pass them through the application. And we call that directory the external directory, because we're talking to external parties. And it will look like this. So this is just a normal Laravel application, but there are 2 folders added, external and product. And in theory, we can even remove the existing structure from Laravel, the existing code, but we just keep it there for general usage. Sometimes you just want to test some things out. Sometimes some things don't really have a place. And we want to keep moving our application. We don't want to think about the name of a smart detail of a folder for days until we deploy something. We just keep releasing, so sometimes something ends up in the shared directory. And we will take time to refactor it at some point, hopefully. So how does this typical product directory look like? So as you can see here, the directory stays the same. We just have a directory with multiple domains in there. And if we dive one level deeper, you can see that we have the same Laravel structure as before. Well, almost the same, only the HTTP directory has been moved a level up. So we removed the HTTP directory, the controllers and resources, requests, those things are all in the priority support directory right away. And as you notice, there's also a service provider PHP file there. So that's very handy if you want to register some things inside the container. It's really nice to use that one. And in the end, the application structure doesn't matter. Like, we use this structure. I prefer this structure myself as well a lot. But if you decide on something else, that's totally fine. It's all about consistency. Consistency is key here. Make sure that you use the same approach on all those features, because it makes it easier to go through them. It's easier to navigate them. I'm talking about this, but like Matthias is way better in this than me. So he has a Laravel series on this called Modular Laravel, and he's doing the exact same things, only a few steps more. So he also makes the config files dynamic, the migration files dynamic, the seeders dynamic. We don't do that. We just put everything in one big directory, all the migrations. And that's our choice, but you have options to make it even per module, put your migration there. And Matthias is showing everything about that in this series. So definitely check that out if you're interested in this. And even if you're not interested in this, you might get some ideas on how things work. He shows you how everything works, and it's actually how packages are built up as well, so it's a very good way to learn. And again, consistency is important here. So I'm a big lover of monoliths, and I occasionally work with some smaller microservices. And sometimes it's really refreshing to work on a microservice. You have a new code base, it's very clean, there's not much code happening. However, the big monolith has a lot of advantages because you can easily connect things together. Even though they're in different domains, you can still connect them together. And that makes it really nice to work with them. And with a good structure and consistency, a monolith is by far the best way to work with. And it's also easier to maintain. So let's talk about the development rules. And actually, there are not that many rules. It's very easy. We have to have some structure, so we use PHP stand, point, and pest for that. And pest usually then for the architectural test. You can also use it for the regular test. That's totally fine. We will talk about testing later. But tools like PHP stand and point and pest, they can really help you to set rules for your developers and make sure that there's a consistent code style, there's a consistent structure, and so on. And this also takes away time from code reviews, because you don't have to talk about should that comma be there or should that bracket be there. It's just all about how the code is structured, and that's way more important and way more valuable. And ideally, you would document these rules somewhere or put them in a config file where everybody can see them. And eventually, you will see certain design patterns pop up inside your code base. Even though you don't think they are design patterns, you will see some certain structures pop up that you reuse. We, for example, have this strategy thing. So we have a strategy class that has a factory that calls certain things. We use it on different places. So if we're gonna, next time we're gonna need something with a factory, we're gonna use that strategy approach again, because it's everybody, all the developers already know that structure, so it's very easy to reuse it. Although it might not be the best design pattern, it might not be the most fancy design pattern, but it's consistent, and that's way more important. And especially when code evolves over time, it's nice to try new ideas, as long as you take the old ideas with them as well. And of course, take time to refactor. It's really important because things change fast in code, especially when we're working with multiple developers. Everybody's releasing all the time. Sometimes you have to rethink certain parts and redo code. And that's totally fine. You have to take the time for it. And it's also okay to not do everything 100% correctly right away. It's totally fine to release something, get back to it, or release an MVP version of it. And we do that all the time. We just release something, wait for feedback, evolve it over time. And sometimes the basic MVP is already enough to get a user signed up or get them working on the code base. And in general, if you work on a perfect code base, my experience is that it either doesn't see the light of day, or it's so perfect that it's never going to be used by a lot of people. So, and it doesn't make any money. So yeah, it's really important. I can't stress this enough. Like, tests are the biggest thing that you can have. We have a pretty big code base with a lot of tests. So I think we have over 5,000 unit tests right now. It doesn't run for 50 minutes. It's a lot faster. We do have some improvements there to make, of course, but I think it's like in 2 or 3 minutes running. So Christoph, if you want to learn something, Christoph can handle it. But there's no way to manually test everything. So instead, like, multiple developers will release every day. So you need those tests. You need to have it. It's very essential. However, a test per module is, because we have so many classes, it becomes like a mess with all those test classes. So how do you set that up? So what we do instead is we put all the tests next to the class itself. It's a very easy change inside your configuration. And you have the test class next to your normal class. So this has a few benefits. One, you can see if there's actually tests for the current class that you have. 2, you can run all your tests from one place. If I run all the actions from priority support, I just go to the directory, put some things on my keyboard, and it just runs those tests. I can also do it for the whole priority support thing. I can just run the whole test of that feature. And that's very helpful. And also, it makes it very easy to navigate my code because everything is connected in the same place. I don't have to search, like, I have to scroll to the test directory and then find the correct directory. It's all in one place, and this is very helpful. And this also works with pest. It's just general PHP unit configuration, so it works on all tools. I wanted to touch upon notifications because I think it's a really great way to clean up your code when working with third parties. So we have a company we work together with called Segment, and we send them events, and they distribute the events to other parties. So for example, we have an event called user signed up, and then they send it to Mailgun, which then sends an email for us, and we send it to our statistics platform. They keep track of it. And there's another platform that sends an SMS a few hours later. Like those kind of events are coming from Segment. And we can connect the API from Segment very easily. That's not a problem, and call the API when needed. But it's much easier if you make it a notification clause. And then you can easily test it as well. So for example, you can create a notification channel, have the code in there, and then whenever we need to notify Segment, we just call a notification. And they're way more easier to test because you can easily fake them because it's a facade. And we just learned that facades are great. And then the notification one can also use the HTTP call. So we can also easily test this channel. And because we only have one place where we're doing an API request, we only have to test it on one place and we can fake the notification. So it becomes much more convenient to start working and sending data around to other companies. And there's a lot of third-party packages that also provide notification channels, or there are third-party packages that provide the HTTP layer to those libraries. But usually it's a lot better to write your own HTTP wrapper because you can easily test it and then put it in a notification. So that's a really nice life hack that we use often. And then jobs. Jobs are by far the best feature. Well, not jobs. The queuing system is the best feature within Laravel. So anything that can be put on the queue using a job, please put it in a job. It definitely helps with maintainability. So when you're running a large application, like you saw before, we are running 51 million jobs a day. And we do that because we put everything that we can put on a job. We can delay it. We put it on the job, in the queue, because it makes it a lot easier. And also, a job is easy testable because it's a small bit of code. Usually it doesn't do too much, so you can easily write tests for it, and they're very isolated to test. I wasn't allowed to put shit on this, so it's shit. Shit is going to hit the fan. With a big application, there's always a new challenge. There's always going to be a new fancy framework. There's always going to be another API change that you didn't anticipate. There's going to be a third party with connection issues. In general, when you work on a large application, there's always something happening, and there's no way that you can work for a month straight on a feature. At least it never happened to me. I'm always putting out fires everywhere. And if it's not your code, it's going to be the database. It's going to be the server that needs to be scaled. There's always a limit that you're going to hit. So yeah, be consistent, try to do that, and there's always going to be fire. So be prepared for that. So I just want to summarize what I talked about. There's no silver bullet. Find your own way. It's really important that you find your own way together with your team, because you have to handle it together. There's not one person that needs to decide. You have to do it together with all the developers. Keep it simple and stick to the defaults. Like we saw it already a few times today. Be consistent and focus on those simple things that Laravel already offers by default. Consistency is the key. People come and go. Be aware of the buzz factor. So I know we have some really great developers, but if they leave and your company is going to shit because of that, well, that's very sorry to hear, and that sucks. So just be prepared for that and make sure that you have knowledge sharing set up. And keep writing tests. Just test. Everything. Everything needs to have a test. So if you go home, you go back to your work on Wednesday, any pull request that doesn't have a test doesn't get merged anymore. That's the rule from now on. Thank you for your time, and yeah. I just wanted to say we are still looking for passionate, product-focused Laravel developers. So hit us up on the hospitable booth or scan the QR code, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
I got a question.
Can I run?
No. So first question is from Sanika. In giving you're handling a large application, how often do you update your packages?
Not often. Like maybe every 4 or 5 months or something. Like, well, when we're trying to do an upgrade, it usually takes some time because we have to upgrade all the other packages or replace them first. So we do them one by one. And usually when we do the Laravel upgrade itself, we update the rest of the packages. So, yeah. Okay. So that's once a year maybe. Yeah. The big update. Yeah.
Yeah. Got to do something at least once a year.
Yeah.
Second question. Why is there a pineapple as a pizza topping? From Build a Cat.
It's AI generated. No, I don't know. No, these are not AI generated. No, I'm not against pineapple on a pizza, but I don't eat it myself. I don't kill for it, but I don't eat it myself either.
Okay, but it's good.
That's good. Yeah.
Better would be Marmite. Marmite on top.
Yeah. That's still better than Marmite on a pizza.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Marmite everywhere.
I have to try that.
And from the anonymous user, do you still do burpees?
Yeah. April.
Burpil.
April. Yeah. We're gonna do it again.
Again?
Yeah.
What? No. I didn't hear. Do you hear that?
I didn't hear anything. Let's go.
Yeah. Burpee? Oh, you can prove it.
Oh, yeah, together.
No.
I will do it myself. We're gonna side by side?
No, I will do it. So, how is it played for? How is it? How do you make a burpee? Explain.
Wait, just go to the ground and stand up.
That easy? Okay, let's count to 3. 1, 2, 3. That's it.
Let's go.
Thank you, man. Bobby Bauman, everyone.